Hello everyone, this is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today I am going to be discussing some common must-know terms if you are interested in getting started in rope bondage and shibari. It's very important if you're interested in getting started in your local rope bondage community or want to start following along with videos and instructions online that you know what they're referring to. What the heck is a cinch? What is a kanuki? What do all these terms mean? And I am here to help with that. And I'm going to be going over as many terms as I can here. I'm going to be going over terms that people use to refer to folks who do rope bondage. I'm going to be talking about terms specifically about ropes, specific types of ties, and specific styles of tying. So hopefully, if you want to get started in doing rope bondage, you will find this helpful. I will also be putting down some links in the description box below for more resources that you can go to if you want to know more about different types of terminology that people use, and as well some just general beginner resources if you want to know more about rope but aren't sure where to start or aren't sure where you can find good information. So let's go ahead and just jump into it. I do have a list here on my phone that I'm going to be using because I wanted to make sure I wasn't forgetting anything important, so I wrote everything out. But the first term I would like to define is a rigger. So a rigger is a reference to somebody who is doing the tying of rope bondage. This is also somebody who is called a rope top. So they are the ones who are actually doing the tying. Another term would be a rope bunny. This is actually a little bit of an outdated term, although you will sometimes still see it around. It is usually used specifically to refer to a female, usually attractive young rope bottom, the person who is receiving a rope. The more common and more accepted term now is rope bottom, although you will also sometimes hear the term rope model, but all of those things generally mean somebody who is being tied as opposed to the one who is doing the tying. Another really big important term to know is nerve damage and nerve pain. This is actually, besides falls from suspension, which I will talk about what that is in a moment, that is actually one of the most common and most prevalent ways that people get injured doing rope bondage. It often feels like weakness, tingliness, stress, tingling, and numbness, but it may actually not result in any colors change in the skin. You may not actually be able to see it happening. You may instead be feeling it happening. Generally speaking, nerve injury or nerve damage or any kind of, nerve activity, shall we say, will be something that is a quick, sudden onset, and it will be something that is very locationally specific as opposed to being something that you feel all around your whole body or all up and down one limb. So for example, you may be feeling something in your pinky or in your thumb or somewhere like that, but that's basically what people are talking about when they talk about nerve damage and nerve compression. There's a bunch of really good information about there, particularly that if you are interested in rope bottoming, you should become familiar with, so you can have good knowledge of what causes nerve damage, what can provoke these sort of responses and how to identify them. Again, I will put resource links down in the description below if you want to learn more about what that is. This is in comparison to compression pain. Compression is what happens when a certain segment or portion of your body is under pressure. So for example, if your leg is being tied, you may notice that your leg is going red or purple. A lot of people look at this and think that that is the dangerous part of rope bondage, and I am here to tell you that is not the case. There is absolutely no correlation between discoloration in your skin and something causing nerve damage. Very oftentimes, the places on the skin where the blood is most likely to pool up and cause that color change effect are not the same places where there are actual nerve bundles that can be provoked. Usually this is something that causes a squeezing type of sensation. It can also definitely provoke pain type responses. But unlike with nerve pain, it tends to be something that is a bit more of a gradual onset and tends to be a bit more widespread. So you may get kind of numb, kind of tingly pins and needles feeling throughout your entire leg as opposed to just one pinky like you might with a nerve damage problem. And again, resource links down below if you want to know more about what that means. Okay, the next term is rope space. Rope space is a specific form of subspace or top space that occurs as the result of rope bondage of some kind. Usually for a rope bottom who is experiencing rope space, this can be described as meditative, floaty, disconnecting, disassociative. It's something that tends to be very almost freeing in a lot of ways for a lot of people. Somebody who is experiencing rope space from the top side of things often describe it as being hyper-focused, being very aware, being concentrated, being very, very, very precisely in that exact moment. Isn't it very interesting how those two things are very like equal and opposite in some ways? But moving on, now that we've got some kind of definitional terms here for how we talk about people who do rope and some body things, let's actually talk about the rope itself. So one very important term to know is a hank or a length of rope. This is, like it sounds, like a length of rope. There are a lot of different standard sizes that, depending on the studio that you're going to in your region of the world, and even the types of people that you're tying, there's a lot of different standard sizes out there. The most common ones would be 30 feet and 15 feet, and then 8 meters and 6 meters, I believe. That definitely depends on region. You can also mix and match, but a hank of rope is a length of rope, kind of regardless if it's 10 feet or if it's 30 feet, it's a hank of rope. The next term is the bite. This is usually spelled as B-I-G-H-T or B-I-T-E. I personally like B-I-T-E. That is how I use the term. But that refers to the center of the rope when it has been folded over and it is even on both sides. Usually this is going to be like the formation of any rope bondage that you're going to be doing is get out your hank of rope and then you find the bite. That is one of the first things that you normally do. There's also the working ends, which once you have found the bite, that is the far opposite side of the rope. It is not the rope that you are actively using. By comparison, there are the running ends, which are the ends of the rope that you are currently using. So there's the bite, there's the working ends, and then there are the running ends of the rope. A lot of these terms are very regional, and different rope spaces and different teachers will use slightly different terms for things like working ends and running ends, but that's what I know them as. Then there is also a band, which is when you have one or more pieces of rope going around the body. So for example, you may have a band of rope that is going around the shoulders and across the chest and back around the shoulders again. This is also sometimes referred to as a wrap. So a wrap or a band is referring to when you have a length of rope that is going around some portion of the body. There is also a loop, which is actually when the rope is crossing back onto itself and it's forming a loop. There is a friction, which is any point when the rope is being pulled back on itself. It's like, let's say you have a point here that you're wrapping your rope around. If you were to go back around and like turn direction, that would be where a friction is created because it's going back around and it's turning back on itself. And then the next definition is a cinch. This is also sometimes called kanuki or kanuki. I've heard it pronounced a couple different ways. If you are doing more of an Eastern influence style of bondage, and basically that is when you are passing a rope around a portion of the body that has been wrapped together, and then you're bringing it through to remove any slack, any gaps, and prevent slippage and movement of that portion of the rope. This is not to be confused with something that is cinching down. Something that is cinching down is something that's getting tighter, and that's not usually a great thing if you're not doing so on purpose. That brings us to the next one, which is a hitch. A hitch is a knot that is used to bind rope with another piece of rope or with an object. So you use a hitch to tie together two lengths of rope if you need more rope in order to complete a tie. You'll also very often hear people refer to a single column tie. That is one of the most basic, if not the most basic type of tie, where a tie is going around one part of the body, and then once it has gone around that part of the body, it's designed to lock off and stay in the right place. It's not supposed to cinch down, it's not supposed to move. It's just tying off that one piece of the body. Now there's also a double column tie, which is when you are tying two pieces of the body together. So that could be a pair of wrists, that could be a pair of ankles, that could be, your thigh to your shin, or a wrist to your ankle, some combination thereof. That is when you are joining those two pieces together using a rope. That is a double column tie. And finally, in this category, there is a collapsing tie versus a non-collapsing tie. When people are referring to a collapsing tie, they're referring to a type of knot or a type of tie where it is going to move back on itself and it is going to tighten. A non-collapsing tie is one that has been locked off. It is one that is not going to change shape unless it's done so purposely by the person who is in control of the rope, as opposed to naturally slipping on its own because of how that particular knot is done. So moving on now to different styles and types of rope bondage that people do. The first term to know is what people refer to as floor work. And floor work refers to basically anytime you are doing bondage that is not involving suspension. You are staying on the ground. Suspension, on the other hand, is when somebody is being lifted up at least partly into the air by rope. Some people separate between partial suspension and full suspension. A partial suspension is when somebody is partly on the ground and partly off the ground. This could be anywhere from like 90% on the ground to 10% in the air to 90% in the air and 10% on the ground. And a suspension is just when they're not touching the ground at all. They have been completely lifted up in the air by the bondage that is being done. Some suspension-specific terminology to know, which if you are interested in suspension, it is an advanced form of bondage, so I wouldn't recommend starting out with it by any means, but just so you know, if you're around at a rope meetup or if you're at a rope jam or something, you kind of know what terms are going on. People will often refer to hard points or anchors. That is a spot where somebody is actually going to be tying off the rope to use for the suspension. That's actually the point that they are going to be using to actually help hold the person up in the air. And usually it's something that is attached to a ceiling. It could also be part of a larger structure such as a metal tripod or a padoga, but usually it's just referred to like as a point where you are lifting somebody up off the ground as part of a suspension. And the last term in that kind of group is an upline. This refers to the line running up from the body to the hard point or the anchor point that is used to gain mechanical advantage to help you lift up the body from the floor of whoever it is that you are tying. Specifically within bondage, there are a lot of different terminologies that refer to different styles of bondage. Generally, you can get these split into Western bondage and Eastern bondage. Western bondage refers to anything that was created in the West, typically America, and then Eastern bondage, 99.999% of the time, really just means Japanese influenced bondage. So those are basically what those two terms mean if you hear somebody refer to them as, and then within those there are more specific terms. American or Western style bondage is very much associated with what is called tightrope bondage, which is where the focus of the rope is primarily on how tight the binds are rather than on creating humiliation with the rope or with creating something that is aesthetically pleasing. It is about creating something that is very, very tight bondage and often involves a lot of compression pain and a lot of just compression in general. With Eastern style bondage are, again, very much a lot of terms, and I am going to be trying to pronounce these as best as I can. I am sorry if I'm not pronouncing them exactly correctly, but especially in the West, we actually use a lot of different terms to go with Eastern style bondage, and maybe even what people in Japan practicing rope bondage do, so just keep that in mind. The most common term you will hear used in reference to Eastern style bondage is shibari, which is a word in Japanese meaning to tie. It doesn't have any particular special meaning. You can literally use it for like to tie up a package or to tie up a shoe. It's not something that has any sort of kink or sex connotations. The one that is more commonly associated with BDSM or sexual practices is kimbaku. Some people will make a differential between kimbaku and shibari as styles. A lot of people do also do fusion styles, especially at least where I live. Shibari is generally considered to be a more artistic, aesthetic, performative type of bondage that is meant to be more visually pleasing in like an artistic format, whereas kimbaku is generally more associated with things that are sexual, sensual, or humiliating in nature. So it's just erotic rope versus artistic rope, more or less. And there's a lot of debate in the community about how to use those terms and how people have been using those terms and should we differentiate them and is that how they use them in Japan and all of that great stuff. So hey, once you're part of the bondage community, you can be part of those discussions too. Okay, so let's get into some specific terms for some Eastern style ties that you will often hear. The first one is agura, which is a cross-legged tie. It's pretty much what it sounds like. It's a tie that forces the person to stay in a cross-legged or in a half lotus position. There's a lot of different ways to do this. You can use it for floor work, you can use it for suspension. It's very much a versatile tie, and it is something that gets incorporated into a lot of other ties, like, for example, an ebi or a shrimp tie. This is something where you are basically forcing the person to be down in kind of like a half kneeling position. You're kind of like curled up halfway like a shrimp would be, and oftentimes people will do some kind of chest harness and they'll connect it down to an agura like tie or to an agura tie, and that is what they use to anchor the person into that kind of half curled up position. And it's very often used as part of a predicament bondage type situation, or just for the pain of having to keep the kind of sort of uncomfortable position for a long period of time. Another term you will hear used a lot in Eastern style rope is a TK or a takatakote. This is possibly one of the most used ties in all of Eastern influenced bondage. It is universal. It's a box tie. It's probably the most common type of chest harness that somebody does for a suspension, and basically what it does is it goes around both the arms and the chest around the back so that it creates a box-like shape. And there are a couple different ways to do it. There's a lot of different styles that get done out there. There's also a reverse takatakote or reverse TK. It's pretty much universal as a sign that you've gotten to the intermediate level when you have been able to sufficiently construct a good TK. In terms of chest harnesses, a shinju is another very common type of chest harness. This is one that does not incorporate the arm, so it is solely using the chest, and it can be done strictly with just bands under and over the bust. You can incorporate shoulder straps, you can incorporate other design elements. The term shinju comes from the Japanese word for pearl, which is a euphemism for breasts. This is often sometimes called a bikini harness, especially when there are shoulder straps added to it, but it's basically like either you're doing a TK or you're doing a shinju if you're involving the chest in some way with Eastern influenced bondage. There's also a futomomo, which is sometimes called a sausage tie or a frog tie out here in the West. And there's a little bit of a difference I've seen with how people define this term. Some people will define it as any type of bondage that involves the upper thigh. Some people will also define it specifically as a tie that incorporates binding the thigh down to the shin, so that way the leg is kind of forced to fold up on itself. That is more what is often referred to as a frog tie or as a sausage tie, because it's binding the leg, and so it's causing that constriction of the leg in the same way, and it is also a very common tie. There is a karada, which is a body harness. This is one of the first things a lot of people learn how to do in bondage, is basically a body harness that goes all the way around. It is very often used in, I think it's one rope technique, which is where you're just using a single rope. Oftentimes with Eastern influence stuff especially, you'll actually, because you're working through the bite, you will be actually having two ropes to a band as opposed to kind of one rope. I don't know if that makes sense to people who aren't used to bondage yet, but basically one rope versus two rope. Usually with a karada, it will be a single rope that goes, you know, down over the chest, torso, and sometimes down into the hips and the leg region. And finally, for our definitions here, there is a hishi, which is diamond. This is not so much any particular type of tie, but it is a style of pattern that you will see very often, particularly in shibari. It's usually incorporated into chest ties, although you can also see it incorporated into decorative leg ties or into hip harnesses and things like that. And that is everything I wanted to cover in today's video. This is definitely not a complete list again, so I will be putting links down in the description box if you guys want to learn more rope terms, if you want to learn more about how to get started in rope bondage. So please do check that out. Let me know if you have any comments or questions, and I will do my best to answer them. If you haven't already and you want to see more from me, please do consider subscribing. You can also check out my social media using the links down below. And finally, if you did enjoy this video and you want to help support this channel so I can do more, if you want to see rope bondage tutorials, if you want to have exclusive chats and videos and all of that great stuff, I do recommend you check out my Patreon. A link will be down in the description box below for that if you want to check it out. That is what helps me make videos like this. That is what helps keep this channel going. And thank you so much if you already support me. It means so much. And until I see you guys next time, have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.